enthusiastically, and it seems a lot of people are very interested. It's not a video question. He asks, what are your plans to deal with out-of-control college tuition and student debt? And just a few numbers here, gentlemen, especially because we're right here in Florida and you're running for the Senate seat in Florida. Over half of Floridian students carry student debt when they graduate. The total amount of student debt in Florida exceeds $1 billion. Florida has double the national average of student debt loans in default, and the average Floridian owes north of $26,000 in student debt, which ranks the 5th highest in the country. How do you combat this problem?
Who would you like to go first?
Congressman Jolly.
So 41 million Americans have student loan debt. Next to mortgages, it's the greatest debt burden on individuals and families. There are some simple things we can do right now by allowing student loans to be refinanced, by making them eligible for reorganization and bankruptcy cases. Those are two initiatives I've supported. Creating additional flexibility for accelerating Pell Grant, need-based aid, considering if we can find a way to pay for it, expanding Pell Grant. But you want to know the real way to do this? Let's tie the performance of long-term student loans to what the universities receive. Because understand, you can rack up $100,000 in debt, and the day of your graduation, the university's been paid. But you might struggle with that debt for decades. Right now, the only trigger on a university that invokes any type of penalty is if a default rate of their graduated students reaches about 18%. I think we should go back to the system where the university is remunerated based on the performance of the long-term loan.
Congressman Grayson.
Well, I have introduced the San All Act. That includes everything that Congressman Jolly just described. It also, beyond that, makes public college free. There are 7 other countries around the world where public college is A, free, and B, taught in English. So you ask yourself, how can Slovenia afford to provide public college in English, where Florida and California and New York and Iowa and New Hampshire somehow can't? If you look at what is actually being spent in the system, it's a drop in the bucket. The entire college system for the state of Florida is a tiny fraction of the state's overall budget. We already have the federal government providing a very substantial part of the K through 12 cost of education. Why do we stop there? You know, it's not a new idea. Free public college dates back in the United States to the 1840s. My father went to the City College of New York, a free college. And there's no reason why we can't make that same promise to everyone else. As I indicated before, we want people to reach their potential in life. Every single one of us is a unique bundle of talents, skills, interests, limitations, and I want to see the truck drivers who are willing and able to become doctors. I want to make sure that everybody reaches their full potential. And in our 21st century economy, that often requires a college education. So I say, let's open up the public colleges to everyone.
Congressman Jolly, do you support debt-free college?
So that's a state decision. If a state and their taxpayers decide to provide that for students, then that's left to the states to decide. I don't think the federal government should be telling the state of Florida that you have to give free college. If the voters in Florida want it, then the administrators of the state university system can decide how to pay for it, and the taxpayers would have to accept that. I don't think there's a role for the United States Congress in that. I disagree with Alan. I disagree with Bernie Sanders on this.
All right, let's move on to the next question. It's about for-profit prisons. Talik Taylor from Chicago. And then, as usual, Floridians voted it up. Black Americans are being persecuted and viciously mistreated in our prison system. Private prisons are at the root, she says. If elected, will either of you support abolishing private prisons? Let's start with Congressman Grayson.
The answer is yes. What is government? One way to look at what government is the government holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Whether we're talking about killing foreign soldiers, or we're talking about the police arresting anyone, or we're talking about a judgment in court, a money judgment being enforced by a garnishment, or for that matter, we're talking about imprisoning somebody. The core function of government is that. So it makes no sense whatsoever to contract it out. It is fundamentally irresponsible to say to someone, we'll let you make a buck off incarcerating somebody else. And it delegitimizes the entire system. The reason why prison guards do what they do, and it's a very difficult, dirty job, it's a horrible job to have. The reason why they can do what they do is because they stand there in the place of you and me. They stand there in the place of the entire U.S., all citizens all together having making these decisions through the justice system collectively. Once you start to say to people, we'll give you an extra $1 if you cut back on the rations, or you put 3 or 4 prisoners in a cell instead of only 2, you've corrupted the system in a fundamental way. We cannot allow that.
Congressman Jolly.
So, listen, I think privatization is an issue for elected leadership to decide if that's the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars. The question is the administration of prisons, regardless if it's public or it's private. Is it being done responsibly? And if somebody's violating the law in the way they're administering a prison, then they should be held responsible for that. You know, I had a very dear friend who made mistakes, and he actually ended up spending time in a state prison here in Florida. Significant health care challenges that I don't believe were being responded to adequately. I don't know if it was a private or a public prison. To me, it didn't matter. The issue was that the administration was failing. And so, should we wholesale prohibit privatization? I don't know. Perhaps there are areas where that is actually working for taxpayers. But the bottom line is if somebody's violating the law in the way they administer a prison, they should be held accountable for it.
Cenk, you mentioned the disproportionate effect on African Americans in your question, and I think that's exactly right. But it doesn't stop there. 23% of the African American adults in this state of Florida can't vote because their rights have not been restored. It's the highest proportion in the entire country. We have to not only treat prisoners as if they are human beings and not profit centers with a profit motive, but we also have to understand that when they've served their time, it's time to let it go and have them rejoin the family of American citizens with full rights.
So, Congressman Jolly, there's been some studies out showing that private prisons are not really cost savers. In Arizona, for example, they actually cost $1,600 more per inmate per year.
Sure.
But to me, the larger question, I think what Talik was trying to get at is not just the effects that it has and the cost that it has, but the fact that we incentivize some companies to take away the freedoms of some Americans. Isn't there something inherently problematic with that?
So that's wrong, and legislators should be held accountable for that. But there may be a model of privatization that saves taxpayers' dollars and does actually appropriately administer a prison system. And if there's one that works, then we shouldn't preclude it.
All right, we're going to voting rights next. So it's from Joel Stivens in Hialeah, Florida. And it goes like this. What will you do to improve voting, not just in Florida, but nationwide? We continue to see the effects of voter suppression wreak havoc in this country. What will you do to improve? There it is again, another repeat. Okay, I personally would like to see open primaries everywhere, a federal voting holiday, and an auto voter registration at the 18 years of age. We had the video on that.
Joel is here to join us.
Oh. Well, then you'll hear it again.
Voting not just in Florida, but nationwide. We continue to see the effects of voter suppression wreak havoc in this country. I personally would like to see open primaries in all 50 states, a national federal voting holiday, and automatic voter registration at 18 years of age.
So let's start with Congressman Jolly on this one. And if you can be specific on his ideas, open primaries, federal voting, voter registration.
I think it's a great solution, open primaries. We should have them right here in the state of Florida. You've got a third of the electorate who is essentially disenfranchised from voting in primaries. And frankly, I think Republicans should embrace this because we can grow the party by embracing conservative solutions that appeal to independents and those who are no party affiliations. So I would say yes to open primaries. And on the other issues, I would say whatever makes voting more accessible, most accessible, so that we have greater participation, I'd be willing to consider that.
Congressman Grace.
Well, first, I have introduced legislation for this purpose. As I indicated before, I've introduced more bills than any other member, and I introduced a bill, among others, for Democracy Day. That makes our federal elections a federal holiday and gives people an opportunity to vote. We have a lot of people in my district who work 1 job, maybe 2 jobs, sometimes even 3 jobs, and they work on Tuesdays. So it makes it very hard for them to vote. Another thing that I'm in favor of, and I've come out in favor of, is the same system they have now in Colorado where they mail every single voter a ballot. You can either use it or you can go and vote on Election Day. Obviously, you can't do both. But I think that has elevated turnout enormously, just as it has in Oregon, which is mail ballot only. Beyond that, I think we have to accept the fundamental idea that it is fundamentally wrong for the government to do anything to frustrate the right to vote. So I favor a